Marc Marquez is the MotoGP World Champion, and in quite emotional, how can I say, in fashion that he'd done it. It was the big release, that 5 year wait, that 6 year wait, whatever you want to call it. The story was closed there, and it was a real. Yeah, it was nice. It was proper raw emotion. There was no sort of silly gimmick celebrations. It was just proper, and I think yeah, that was the best way for him to celebrate his world title. His teammate gets back to winning ways and seemingly has found the key to success. And guess what? Honda are back on the podium as well at their home Grand Prix, and it's good. It was really good vibes on that podium. I could sense it was just nice, and I think MotoGP crowns as champion, and you get all these stories that come together. You can't really ask for much more. Joining me, Jordan Morland, to discuss everything from the weekend in Motegi is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. And Lewis, we'll start with you. The title's wrapped up. It's probably been wrapped up for X amount of months now, but that moment when it's official it's special, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think we've sort of seen this as very much a formality from kind of mid-season onwards, but really, Marquez is, he's mentioned this before, he's touched on it before that, the injury thing, he knows that it can happen again, so it doesn't matter how dominant you can be, you need to get it over the line. And we came into this weekend and he said he was treating it like a normal one, but then we got to the sprint and he openly admitted that he was too nervous, he was too rigid, he wants to get the championship done now that it's finally back within his grasp. The nerves are there, so yeah, maybe from watching from the outside it wasn't particularly exciting when you felt like a formality, but certainly from his perspective it's much different. And it's a great story. I think a lot of people wrote Marquez off, after 2020 when he, even when he came back and was winning races, people weren't convinced he was going to get any better than that. The Honda stuff, the bike was not competitive. He kept crashing. There was just no, and repeated injury things as well with double vision. Fourth operation in 2022, which there was no guarantee that it was going to be successful. There's just been a lot in there for Marquez to kind of overcome and to get back to where he is, and it's a great story and one that I think does redraw really the whole debate about greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think that obviously the sides of the argument, and there's always two prevalent names, maybe three if you consider certain generations, but this doesn't happen in sport. It doesn't, and this is what I think people need to try to understand. Marquez could have just disappeared after that injury. It could have just written him off, and he just went, I've done what I've done, and why would I suffer the pain anymore? I just can't. And he got to that point, and he went, let's try again. And it's like, when they try again, I think it means so much more to win it now, because it's like, if he had done it in 2020, if everything went normal and it equaled 9, it's just another title, isn't it? This one carries the weight of like 4 titles. I don't know. I can't explain that. It just has this validation that everything that he went through was just like that was the moment you were looking for, and even he didn't know what the moment would feel like, but when it hit him, it just like. I mean, I don't know how they mic'd him up. Either. That was pretty impressive. You could hear him crying, and it was really like that was really smart. And I think you got the capture of emotion that he had with his brother, and yeah, it was great. It was purely just like the story, like, doesn't usually have a happy ending sometimes. It doesn't always pan out how it is, and it got it. Like, whatever he goes on to do 5 years' time, next year, whatever, this is the moment where it's like, that'll be the picture you'll see in 50 years' time. That's him, and that's the story that'll be told. Pete, what do you make of it? You've been obviously a MotoGP journalist for 2 decades. I don't mean to make you sound old, Pete, but you've seen everything. You've seen from the start how Marquez has came into MotoGP, and that chase that he's always had. He says he doesn't care about the numbers. It's all about just fulfilling himself. But this one is the diamond, isn't it?
It is, and just to continue the discussion you guys are having, I think what makes it so special is that it combines elements of other great champions' careers. You know, the injury comeback of Mick Doohan, but of course Mick's injuries were before the titles, so you know it's a different mentality then, isn't it? So Mick still had everything to prove, still that hunger to sort of get to the top, but everything else. You know, Marc has his injuries after he's won 6 titles, and then the point that you're making then about not throwing in the towel, you know, when everything's going against you, which reminds me of Valentino Rossi after the Ducati years, you know, where he wasn't winning. Everyone's saying, look, you're done. Why not just bow out? You know, go off into the sunset, everything else. Instead, he takes a decision a bit like Marc. They go back to a bike they know, which kind of exposes them, doesn't it? Where it's down to them. They know the bike is competitive. Marc, in his case, the Ducati, his brother's been on it the year before. He's going there to see, have I still got it? Rossi, the same thing at Yamaha. So, you know, Marc has got all these elements in one career, and I think that's what makes it so special. And, you know, the time between titles as well, and all of that, you know, everything he's been through, you know, he must have thought this day wouldn't arrive, and yet here he is. As you said at the start, John, you know, sometimes sport doesn't follow a script, does it? You know, and Marc's had the very highs and the very lows, but certainly, as you say, you can see what it meant to him today to finally return to the top, and very different emotions to his previous titles, wasn't it? And he did kind of admit that he kind of got used to winning, didn't he, over all those years, actually from 2010 in 125, when was it, 8 out of 10 years he was champion, and the others you could almost put down as a blip. And yet there he was. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were talking about 1,000 days without a win, was it? And all that kind of thing. And then here he is completely dominating this season. So I think for me, that's what makes it special, is just that you can take elements of different careers. He's been the youngest champion. He's now the oldest champion of the modern era. All these things in one career. It's amazing, really, to have that.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think that I don't know how that people can. This is not a dig at F1, but have you ever watched an F1 title celebration and go, did someone actually win anything here? That today was is the best advert that Liberty Media could have for a story. And it's Hollywood. You don't get that sort of story anywhere else in sport. Yeah, you get it with certain athletes. You've seen Tiger Woods. Yes, Tiger Woods it's very different. Tiger had a lot of off the course struggles and injuries and everything that went into it, but it's similar in that sense. I see it as there's people have more titles than Marc, but that title win just elevates him to status of legends of sport. And I think for me, Lewis, he is hand in hand with the sport. What are we gonna do whenever this guy finishes? Because there's such a big void, isn't there? We've had it with Rossi, and Marquez is carrying it. We need characters like this, don't we, to just sell the sport essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's on the championship to promote the thing properly. It's on the riders to up their game. You know, we look at the last couple of years of World Championship battles, and they haven't pushed the needle in terms of interest, and that's no disrespect to Pecco Bagnaia or Jorge Martin, but you know, as we've seen this year, the two of them have largely faded into obscurity for one reason or another. And it's kind of rewritten the kind of past. We had Joan Mir on the podium as well, and he was asked about this, if people undervalued you as a champion, and he said yes, but you know, as he also pointed out, you're only as relevant as your sort of results are. So if they drop away, you're going to drop away. And you know, even someone like Fabio Quartararo, you know, 6 years ago when Marc won the championship, we were looking at Fabio as being the next one to challenge him. He was the one that was really pushing him. He was the one that pushed him into another winter of injury recovery, remember, because he forced him into that mistake in qualifying in Sepang where he dislocated his shoulder and he had to go and have surgery. Off of several years before that point of winters of recovery, because Marquez had kept injuring himself. So it does change very quickly, and you know, we all kind of, MotoGP's back to a position where it's quite popular again, largely I think because of Marc, and that'll carry on, and you know, but it's on the others to beat them. I mean, I think the next few rounds will be interesting now that Marc can take the chains off a bit. You know, what's that going to do? Is he just going to go and absolutely wipe up? Is he going to go up against a rejuvenated Pecco Bagnaia, and we're going to see that actually, yeah, Pecco next year, if he can carry this on, yeah, it's going to be a big challenge. It always depends on other people. We see it in lots of other sports. It depends on, you look at Formula One, it depends on, well, maybe a bad example because a lot of that depends on the car really, but you have those periods of greats. It's the Schumacher domination era, and then he steps away, and what replaces it was going to be Fernando Alonso, but that didn't really work out very much afterwards, and then Hamilton comes along. But people forget Hamilton's championship in 2007. There was a big gap then until he was champion again in 2014, and that was because he jumped into the best car in a brand new era, and that's taken away nothing from the talent. But you look at those early years of the kind of hybrid era in Formula One, and it was two cars. It was two cars doing the winning, and one of them was Lewis Hamilton, and one of them was Nico Rosberg. The scale is very much weighted in one direction. So
yeah, when Nico Rosberg eventually beat him, he ended up retiring because he couldn't have the mental strain to do it again, sort of thing.
So there's always going to be these periods where people are interested in the person doing the best things, and that's Marc. And the GP25 in his hands has been a good bike. Has it been Ducati's best bike? Probably not. And I think going back to the earlier debate, talking about Marquez's championships and where that elevates him, most of it was done on not super competitive machinery. The Honda bikes for the first couple of years, were good. Then sort of from 16 onwards, they weren't as strong. And then in 19, it definitely wasn't a strong package. And, again, I think compared to a lot of other riders, and again, I don't, and sportsmen in general, and this isn't, again, a knock. I'm not saying these people are not talented, but I think with Marquez's championships, it's been far easier to see where the differences come, compared to maybe some other people within that kind of sphere. You take Agostini, for example. His championship kind of reign really came at a point where there was no manufacturer competition. All the big Italian manufacturers pulled out. Then Envy Augusta were like, no, we're going to carry on now.
Yeah.
And so you had just this massive disparity. And yeah, you got to go do the result, but it changes things. Dune in the Honda in the 90s, that was kind of the best package at that point. And Dune was very clearly the best rider with the best package. Rossi as well has always had the best bikes. And for the the time period as well, like until later in those 2000s, he didn't have super strong competition, not from within the manufacturer, not from out with either. So, I think these are all different kind of considerations. And to answer your question, Jordan, I mean, there's no point thinking about what's going to happen beyond Marquez. Just enjoy it now, and yeah, I think people do need to enjoy these things and understand and recognise that they're witnessing history.
Yeah. Pete, what do you make of his press conference where he said, I think he said he's human. He says, I'm just human. And it's like, for so many years, you're told you're an alien. It's like, people see the human side of you and the emotion. That would surely change people's perception of him when they see how much it means to him and how he's came through this journey.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was he was keen to stress, wasn't he? I'm human. I have talents. You have talents. We have different talents. Everything else. The other phrase that sort of jumped out was that I'm at peace, isn't it? At having sort of achieved what he's been fighting for so long since his injuries, and I think it does bring up the question of what next, isn't it? How will he feel next year, having now got back to the very top again? I think, unfortunately for his rivals, he's going to be even more confident, isn't he? It's going to give him that boost. But on the other hand, where's the future now? Is it I think obviously as long as he's 2026. The rules are staying the same. It's the last year of the 1,000 cc's. He's the runaway favourite going into it, unless there's some radical... unless Pecco continue this run, I suppose, for the end of the year. But and actually, that'll be the interesting thing now, isn't it? Is that Marc, he's not going to want this season to end, although it's obviously going to go down as a classic year for him, with... Oh, and by the way, his teammate, after they sorted the bike out, went and won all the races at the end of the year. So I think we have got something to look forward to there, at least, in that Marc's going to want to really just put the icing on the cake and, who knows, beat his win record of, 13 from previously in a season.
2014, yeah. So he's got a few things that I think he wants to tick off. I think the wins, the teammate. I mean, he's never been beat by a teammate. Like, I mean, over a championship year. But you're right, Pete, because in the past when he's wrapped up championships, he wants to let people know, oh, by the way, next year this is not changing. So I think we're going to get a lot of the. I think back, there's a video from 2016 when he won the title, and all the Honda guys and them were out in a bar drinking, and they had this pretend rope and they cut it, and it was like, you're free to go now, sort of thing. And he ended up crashing in like next 2 out of 3 races, but that was the point. Like he gets told you can have some fun now, but maybe because he's older, wiser, he knows that he's got time and he can take it as it comes. But yeah, I think that there's. I'd be worried if I was everyone else on the grid, because now that he says he's in 2026 mode, I don't know what that means. Lewis, just before we finish on Mark, before we get to the others, how do you think the weight of this title for him compares to Honda titles? It's because it's kind of weird the way it works, isn't it? Like we talked about, like Honda are all there on the podium with him, and it's quite ironic, really, that it happens in Japan. How do you think he'll view this title compared to the others?
I think it's a difficult one right now. He said in the press conference that it felt the same as, or similar to 2019. But he also said quite a lot, he doesn't want to remember kind of what he's gone through right now, but it's quite hard for him not to. And I think that's the thing that's yet to happen, is he's yet to really kind of fully sit down and just with his own thoughts and actually really reflect on the last 5 years. And I think when he's done that and he's processed that, he will look at this championship as being the best one, because it proved. I don't think he cares about proving anything to other people. He's 6-time world champion. Who cares what someone like us three think, really, in the grand scheme of it? It's, who cares?
True,
if you're in that position, we can criticize all we want and we'll continue to. That's our job. But fundamentally, I'm not a motorcycle rider. I've never raced motorcycles, and most people watching haven't. Certainly not to the level of Marc Marquez. Nobody has achieved what Marc Marquez has achieved, really, and ridden the way of Marc Marquez, is watching the sport right now. So our opinions, I guess, are irrelevant on that front. But for him, I think it's proven the point. This whole decision to quit Honda, which people, I think, maybe forget, was a really difficult thing. People just think, oh, well, it was an uncompetitive bike. He went to Gresini. It wasn't a simple thing. I remember when those rumours came about, we were in the Misano paddock and they started coming about, and then it got to that Monday test and he tried the bike and it didn't work. And I think you could see on his face the disappointment there, because he knew a decision was coming up, and really what he wanted to do was stay with Honda. I did an interview with him for Autosport magazine at the end of 2022, just after he'd had his 4th surgery and he was back on the podium in Australia. And he said, look, my dream is to win with Honda, but if I cannot do that, I will find another option. So I think he just really, really wanted this to work with Honda. He wanted Honda to put a bike in front of him that he could at least ride to his level, and then he could let his talent do the rest, and that didn't happen. Going to Gresini to not take a paycheck, I don't think that wasn't a problem for him. It was the fact that he had to take this risk on his own. He couldn't bring his family with him. He had to go and do this for himself. And so I think that, in the fullness of time, when he thinks about this championship, that'll be the thing I think that will stand out for him, is that he went and did this on his own, and he succeeded in doing what he set out to do, which was not necessarily win the championship. It was to find his form again. It was to find his enjoyment again. It was to see if he can still be competitive, and he did that in the spades. And I guess the nice thing about it, maybe one of the most enduring images I'll have of this championship, was the picture of him and Alex, on the cooldown lap. You see the expression on both of their faces. This has been a really long journey. Alex, as he said, we've only seen 10% of this. He's seen pretty much the entirety, all the behind the scenes of what's going on. And of course, it was Alex that convinced him. He put the hard sell on him to come to Grassini. Going back to that Misano weekend, I remember having an interview scheduled with Alex Marquez, and people were texting me being like, "Oh, you need to ask him about this rumor that's popped up." So I sat down. Obviously, people have been doing it all day, and he said to me, with all the things that I've found at Grassini, I found a better place, a family atmosphere, competitive. I'm having fun. That's all that Marc was looking for. So a lot of this championship, kind of the credit for that goes to Alex. And I think because of that as well, Alex being such an intrinsic part of that, the fact that Alex was really the title rival, I think will be really special for Marc. So I think all of those things combined, he'll look back at this as being his best championship. I think in terms of pure sporting, it's his best championship. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I think we're all three of us are concerned, based on the rankings feature that we posted today. So, yeah, I think this will be looked at as important for Marc, the most important.
Absolutely. And just to read Alex Marquez's message on Instagram, he says, "Only we know what you've been through in the last 5 years. You're my biggest inspiration. I'm so proud to be your brother. Congratulations." So it's like you said, what he said in his interview after, that the 10% thing, like, you don't see what Marc's doing at home in that 5 years span. And I think you only got a little insight of what actually went on in that documentary series that he put out on Amazon. It was like a snippet. You're like, Jesus, that looked grim already. And you see the amount of painkillers he was on and how tired he looked, and he looked shattered. And it was like, this arm needs fixed, and then the journey begins again. But as Lewis, as you say, that 22 to 23 step that's the key point, because he wanted to stay with Honda. He did, of course. That's his family, as you say, and I think that the way it's all worked out today, as I've said before, it's just magic. I think it's just, the script's perfect. We'll finish that with Marc. I know people are probably like, get to the race, but let's be honest, the race was pretty boring anyway. There wasn't much action, but there's a few talking points in it. Pete, Pecco Bagnaia, I can't believe he's the first person in the modern era to win on a two-stroke. It was smoking like whatever in the last 20 laps or whatever, 15 laps. And yeah, at one point I thought he was getting the flag to pull in, because it was really sort of concerning, and he didn't actually know. He said he could smell it on the in the cool down room, but it was it was a great performance. But that would have been worrying if he had like a black flag. He probably would have went and flew home straight away.
I think so, yeah. And it would have just sort of almost summed up his season, wouldn't it? That just when he seems to have made a breakthrough, something random almost happens that hasn't been a problem all year. And sort of takes it away from him. But luckily it all held together, and you can see Danny Aldridge really studying, making sure there wasn't any fluid, coming out of the bike anywhere, which obviously would have been a black flag. And the engine held together. So yeah, we don't know how old that engine was. We'll be able to find out probably in a few hours from the engine sheets. But he didn't, as you say, he was completely unaware. That's probably the best thing. But Marc did sort of joke, didn't he? That he had smoke in his eyes, and even before the tears started. But but otherwise, I mean, what an amazing turnaround for Pecco. I mean, coming from, what was it, nightmare, disaster, the words we were hearing at Misano only two weeks previously, and then suddenly this sort of perfect weekend of pole, sprint win. The sprint, of course, where he sort of normally struggles more anyway, and suddenly that goes his way as well. And then the Grand Prix win. So, the big question, what did they change? We started to hear these, as the weekend went on, there was these lines that kept being parroted out, wasn't there, of, I'm just the rider, I just ride the bike. But, I mean, we heard earlier in the weekend that he was saying it was an unconventional change. So, clearly he knew what the change was in order to be able to say it was unconventional. So Pecco knows what it was, and for whatever reason they want to keep a lid on it, but it will come out in the end, because you can be sure that all of the other Ducati teams will be saying, what did you change? Because they'll want to know if it's something that can help them, won't they? Even the guys, obviously Digi's got a 25, but also the other bikes for next year that potentially will be getting the 25. So we will find out in the end. We do know that it was previous parts, or parts that have been tried in pre-season testing. Pecco did say that I think just before the weekend. I think I think he even said that Marc has some of the parts. Exactly how old those parts were, what they were, the seat unit we could see, was it, the forks, the swing arm, ride height device, even whatever it was, it seemed to work, didn't it? And Pecco was using numbers like 0.7 seconds a lap. He was quicker at Misano when he had, I think it was two bikes. The bike that he went with at Motegi, and I presume his standard GP25. I mean, that's a massive difference, isn't it? And what I think the other thing that jumped out from Pecco's words were, he was saying he was happy but also angry, wasn't he? And you can kind of understand that. He's been under a lot of he's taken a lot of stick this year, hasn't he? People saying it's just in your head and whatever else, and obviously he's just had to sit there and watch Marc dominate come into his team and dominate on the same bike. And it seems like, for whatever reason, this combination of parts that slipped through the net somehow, didn't it? Misano was the third in-season test of the year. Pecco did say that just before the Jerez test, the Aragon test, he'd finished in third place. So he hadn't had bad races, which maybe stopped them being a little bit more extreme, shall we say, with what they were testing there. Whereas Misano, it had been a disaster. So there really was, right, we're going to just start with a blank sheet, I guess, and work from there. But yeah, we're all waiting to know exactly what it was and what it changed. But certainly he looked like the Pecco of old. And let's see. I mean, the good news is that we have a fight for the end of the season potentially. If not with Marc, then with Alex for second in the World Championship. So because there's still 5 rounds left to go. Marc's already got the title in the bag. So let's hope we can at least get some good racing between the three of them. There's a lot to play for all of them. A lot of points at stake, pride at stake, wins at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. Pecco was great. Now it was kind of like, I got annoyed. I was like, where was this? Why did you not find this earlier? Because I want to see some battles, that sort of thing. You say, he'd be frustrated too about it, but the result doesn't change this year. Marc still wins the title. It's just could have been delayed longer, and that's the thing. And yeah, Pecco was great, and I think it's good to see the smile back on his face and not say anything. I think that whole cycle, I think I found something that, no, it goes around the circle again, and it's like every weekend. I'm glad that stopped, and it's good for him, it's good for his side of the box, because they work really hard, and it's good to say that maybe Casey Stoner had an influence. I think he mentioned that too. So Pecco back to winning ways, good.
I think just on the Pecco thing as well, is obviously a lot's been made of Stoner, but he was kind of at pains to point out Manuel Poggiali's influence on this as well, the video analyst, who's got a bit of an insight as to the job he does behind the scenes at Misano. He goes out trackside every session with camera, studying the lines of not just the Ducati riders but all the riders, and then they use that essentially to help give the riders something visual to go along with the data. And he said both Poggiali and Stoner were seeing the same things. Now, as we've discussed before, and as we wrote, Ducati's biggest problem with Pecco this year is that they haven't been able to match his feeling and the feedback from the bike to the data. So I do still think there is an element there of he did get a little bit too inside his own head, because the results at the start of the season were pretty decent, and then they dropped off. So there's that kind of element there of, okay, what changed? Because if you weren't really changing the bike to get better, then the bike didn't get worse, the rider did. So I think there is still that element, and I think we need to wait a couple of rounds, because Motegi, the high mass discs, brake discs are mandated here, which we know Pecco's gone well on before this year.
Did the double last year as well.
Yeah, so next weekend in Indonesia we've got the stiffer tyre carcass, which really worked against him in Austria this year, after he thought he was. So I'm still reticent to be like, okay, yeah, great, Pecco's back. It's fantastic that he had the weekend that he did. Certainly the consistency of it makes me lean towards them having actually found something. But again, as we were speaking off air, had the championship not been on the line, would that gap between himself and Marc have been as big as it was? We can speculate all we want, but we'll get that answer hopefully over the next few rounds. But yeah, I think it's good that they've found something he's comfortable on, but I think this goes back to the point we made already this season, is that Pecco is far too much of a rider that needs as much support as possible, and then when the need to ride around things comes, he kind of seems to, that's where he falters.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the point of Poggiali, I'll also link in. There's a good Ducati Inside video where they essentially, as you say, you get shown Lewis, but they done it maybe, I think it was in Qatar, and he talked about what he does, and it shows you him going to trackside, and it shows you. So, and you have to remember, Manuel Poggiali is a 2-time world champion too, so he knows what he's talking about in the lower classes, obviously. So yeah, he's a fantastic sort of asset to have. Of course, he was at Gresini previously, and he helped Enea Bastianini a lot, and of course in the factory team now. So I think, yeah, I'll link it below and watch it. It's really interesting. You get to understand that I think every factory has someone, but they don't have a world champion like Poggiali doing it, so it's really a vital role in modern MotoGP. We'll talk about Jorge Martin next, Pete. That yesterday was scary. I mean, the crash that he had, it was a misjudgment from him into turn one. Just kind of, you could see from the helicopter that the way it moved across, and then the others were just kind of trying to get in position on the inside. He outbraked himself massively, and unfortunately took out his teammate, and no one else thankfully got hurt. Bezzecchi, I think, hurt his leg, but Martin has a displaced fracture of his collarbone, and if you're watching the podcast, I'll stick it on screen now, the x-ray. It's gnarly. It's a bad break, and this is the 4th injury, Pete, this year for Jorge Martin. I mean, as far as title defenses go and a season, it's been chaotic, hasn't it?
Just a complete nightmare, isn't it? I mean, it just continues, and just when he's starting to find his feet, what did he say? That my pre-season is over. I think that was his words coming into this round, you know. And here he is, kind of back where he was in the real pre-season, injured. And yeah, I mean, I suppose that the difference here is that he knows it was his fault, doesn't he? I mean, that's the difference here. So, whereas there was some debate about tyres and different things, and a bit of bad luck in Qatar with Digi being behind him, etc. This was his fault, and I suppose it could have been worse, couldn't it? I mean, the way that he hit the back of the bike, that's the other thing that we should say. Hitting back of Bezzecchi's bike at that speed, and in some ways similar to Taka Nakagami at Catalonia, wasn't it? Getting caught up in the rear tyre, tyres, chains, and sprockets and things like that. It's the last thing you want to be tangled up in. So could have been worse, but yeah, just like you're saying. I mean, I can't imagine a title defence that has been anywhere on the scale of just incidents, bad luck, injuries, all of everything that's happened. I mean, we're talking about Mark and the film script, if you like. I mean, Martin's would be a horror movie, wouldn't it? I mean, absolutely. That's even without the contracts and everything else coming into it. So, yeah, it's. I mean, what now? I mean, there's no point rushing back, is there? He'll have an operation. He'll plate it. I mean, physically, he could be okay in a couple of weeks, but there's no need. With his position in the championship, things like that, it's obviously not even relevant. So, it's now just about. Well, they were already working for 2026, weren't they? But it'll be about just come back for the final rounds. He'll have to come back because, let's face it, he'll have a penalty to serve. I mean, nothing's been decided yet, has it? But when your own team manager is calling it a serious misjudgment, I think it's safe to say that the FIM stewards are going to see it in those same terms at least. So he'll have some sort of penalty that he doesn't want to carry over to next year. So he's going to have to come back at some stage, even if it's just to get that out the way. And obviously there's the Valencia test, things like that. So I would imagine it, just guessing, that he will try to come back for the final 2 rounds in Europe. But and I suppose just finally, for Aprilia, you can understand the fears, if you like, the being so clear with their statement that it was his fault, because that could have been both of their riders taken out, and Bezzecchi's fighting for third in the championship, which would be Aprilia's best ever MotoGP finish, in the World Championship. So, it was a scary incident in itself, and it could have completely left them without any riders in the factory team. So, yeah, thankfully Bezzecchi saw but came back, and decent ride on Sunday, wasn't it?
Really good.
He lost points obviously to Pecco. He was close to 8 points going into this round in the fight for third, if you like. And Pecco now being on form, and that crash at the start of the sprint has hurt Bezzecchi a bit, but he's still in there, and uninjured thankfully. But definitely a scary moment for them both.
Yeah, Lewis, what do you think of this situation for Aprilia? It's just like a roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare. I wanted just to clarify something, because I assume people will probably ask the question, if he's injured, then why should he get a penalty if he misses races? Surely that's a penalty enough. Under the new regulations, they don't take that into account anymore. It actually says in the documentation that if you are unable to serve the penalty relating to the incident that has caused the penalty, then you will have to serve that at the next time that you appear. If you're taken out of a race or whatever, you're ill or injured, not related to it, then they count it as served. So in Hungary, for example, Enea Bastianini had a penalty, crashed on the first lap, didn't have to serve the penalty. That was deemed served because it was an incident unrelated. Although the Tech 3 team did actually need to be reminded of that because they weren't 100% sure themselves, so they were trying to get his second bike ready to get him out to go serve the penalty. So yes, okay, the penalty hasn't been issued yet, but the stewards, it is still technically under investigation, and there is very likely to be a penalty for that, but they're going to wait until they can speak to Martin, which will probably not be until Australia, if that's, when he comes back. So yeah, on the Aprilia, I mean, part of me does wonder if Rivola's comments, the serious misjudgment thing, is just a little bit of the summer situation still kind of existing in the background, that whole, double injury and then trying to break contract, that's still a big wound to heal. And I just wonder, given that Aprilia really went to bat, to get Martin, they really, Rivola really kind of put his credibility on the line with Piaggio management to get them to put more money on the table to get Martin's contract, secured. It's been injury, then they've had that situation with the contract, and then he's come back, and then, at the point where he's, they made a big step in the Misano test where he felt he was riding better, to then qualify 17th. And then be in a position where he's got great race pace, but clearly he's out of position, so he's trying to make up as much ground as possible. That puts you in a position to make mistakes, and it was a misjudgment, and it had big consequences, and it has worse consequences it could have had worse consequences for Bezzecchi, but it does have negative consequences for them right now, because they need both of those factory riders to be up there, because they're in a really tight race for second in the constructors with KTM. If you're a manufacturer that's won a Grand Prix this year, you shouldn't be finishing behind one that, kind of has very, very up and down form. Bezzecchi's doing a great job, but if he's got no rear guard, that does just make things a lot more difficult for Aprilia. So I think as well, that's where they're upset, is that finally they've gotten back. He's been getting there. The pace is there. The qualifying's still struggling, and then he goes and makes a kind of silly mistake like this. And potentially, end the season again with more injury problems, And I guess there would be a worry as well with an Aprilia. The last time he was injured, he suffered a bit mentally, which is what led to this whole kind of contract saga in the first place. So are they convinced that he's going to be kind of strong enough to deal with this? That's, I guess, these are worries. And when you have put yourself in that position, these are then, the pressure does intensify. So, will be interesting to see what Martin's kind of response is over the next few weeks, and especially what his response is about this incident, because he hasn't actually had a chance to speak to the media yet.
I think the only thing he's kind of put out on social media, he's kind of said, sorry to, Bezzecchi and that, and that's it, really. But, like I say, I want to hear what he has to say about it, because when you see the video, it's just that's a misjudgment, and it's shit, that could have been way worse. But yeah, Martin, like I said, don't know when he's back, but he will have surgery today or tomorrow, isn't it? Monday, I think. Monday, yeah, he'll have surgery. So whenever you're listening to this, he'll be getting operated on. So yeah, just the worst season possible for Jorge. And like I say, as his title reign ends and goes to Marc Marquez, he just has to rebuild and to try to get something going into the winter, because this is just not where he wants to be. But positive sides for another manufacturer, Pete, Honda, factory Honda team especially, home race. We know they've been testing at Motegi the odd time with their test riders, and this weekend it was hang on Friday it was the pace is good from both Mir and Marini, and then in qualifying, I mean, I forget what time it was over here. I think it was 3 a.m. I leapt out of my chair nearly when he put it first. I was like, oh my god, Mir's going to get pole, which would have been his first. But obviously, Bagnaia went and bettered it. But for him to get front row, a P4 in the sprint, Uh, third in the Grand Prix, first podium in nearly 4 years coming. Uh, that's just like that's the world champion. That's who Honda signed. That's the guy. And I think for him and Honda to do that at their home race, that was proper. Like, good for you. Like, you really delivered on home soil.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, most of the riders we've been talking about today, isn't it? Confidence has been a big thing, with Marc, Pecco, Jorge Martin, and I think we can add Joan Mir to that. That this result will give his confidence a big boost, and he was reminding people or saying, you're as good as your last race in MotoGP, aren't you? And it's easy to forget what he's done in the past, but riders themselves are the same. They start to, even Marc started to doubt himself after all those seasons of not winning and things. So to get the job done, as you say, Jordan, to in qualifying as well. I mean, Mir's never been a great qualifier, so to just to get that off the list, wasn't it? It was a big thing, and then to fight with Marc in the sprint, and then you think, well, maybe he'll suffer, the longer race, maybe the tyre wear, a bit like Acosta kind of faded. Instead, he was strong, wasn't he? And I think it's a, especially given all of it, because let's face it, Jorge Martin's had a bad year, but Joan Mir's had some. Everything looks not so bad next to Jorge Martin, but his season of just the race retirements, DNFs, and all the bad luck he's had, he's had a lot to get over as well. And as you say, to do it in Honda's home race in front of Honda, it's perfect timing, isn't it? It just shows the progress they're making. That bike is quick on the straights now as well, isn't it? Whether it's the traction, whether it's the engine, whatever it is, there's a big step there. And Marc had to put that block pass on him in the sprint, didn't he? And Mir didn't complain because he said, well, it's the only way you can pass people. But part of the reason is because that bike is quick now on the straight. So they are putting the sleeping giant that is Honda, if you like, is starting to stir, aren't they? They're starting to wake up, and Mir's just showing that they've got the rider there. You don't win world championships easily, and they've got a rider there that can that's ready. Give him a competitive bike, and he's ready to perform. And yes, he's probably overridden that bike out of frustration, as a lot of Honda riders have in the past, overridden it, crashed a lot, etc., etc. Yeah. But we were talking about the mental side with Marc, everything else, and Mir's showing that he's still got that hunger. So many years after winning the his title, and as you say, so many years even after a podium, for goodness sake, he's still got that hunger to push. When he's got the bike, he can deliver. So as with Pecco, it's a bit like, well, okay, is it just a one-track thing? Let's see if he can sustain it going into Mandalika and everything else. But certainly, a massive boost. It's one thing to believe in yourself, but you've got to do it, haven't you? At the end of the day, we saw that with Marc, what it meant. Even though everyone knew he was going to win the championship, you've got to actually do it. Mir's done it now in terms of getting that bike on the podium and fighting with the very best in MotoGP at the front. Really, only Pecco was in a class of his own, wasn't he? So it was a great step for him, great boost for him, for Honda, and shows that they're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I wonder what Marc was thinking yesterday whenever he was like, this Honda, I can't overtake this. This is different. I think that's a real sort of, in the 2-year span that he's left, it's like, that bike's came a long way. And what do you think about that, Lewis? I think Mir's attitude's always been, I'll get there eventually, and people kind of like, oh yeah, but you keep crashing, blah, 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 bad luck. But like, shows, doesn't it, today and over the weekend, how he is as a rider.
Yeah, well, I think he said pre-weekend, is after what happened in Misano, he was like, we have pace from Friday, we can hit the ground running and we can get a strong base, and we just need to avoid mistakes. And full credit to him, that's exactly what he did, and he was competitive. But again, we talk about this kind of full circle moment for Marc. One of the things he talked about when he left Honda was that they're saving 15-20 million euros a year, which they not having to pay him now for his contract, which they can put into bike development. And that we've kind of just seen a visual representation of why really Marc leaving Honda was necessary for both parties, because without that happening, neither of them end up in the position that they do today. That's that is the reality of it. So Honda went through that period. They recognized that things needed to change, and they have done. They brought in Romano Albesiano, but even before that point, they were starting to experiment outside of the kind of their normal operating parameters. They had that kind of relationship with Kalex for a little while. They've had that outside influence, and now, you know, they're accelerating that. They've got Kurt Trieb from KTM coming in to work on the engine side. Clearly, the engine side is in quite an okay place right now, so that's only a benefit. You know, compare that to Yamaha, for example. You know, Yamaha building a V4, they've used Luca Marmarini for years, but they haven't really been able to get a good engine going. Whereas Honda are bringing in a great engine technician on a really decent base package now. That's how you make improvements. So yeah, I think this is more tangible proof of, you know, Honda's kind of development, especially compared to Yamaha. I think whenever we've seen Yamaha quick, it's been at the hands of Fabio Quartararo. You know, what we're seeing there is that when the bike gets into a position where Fabio's talent can take over, Fabio takes over. You know, Fabio is one of the best riders on the grid. Still, for my money, you know, if you put him on a bike of equal kind of comparableness to Marc and the Ducati, Fabio's going to be the closest challenger. Whereas if you look at, you know, Honda this year, Zarco's been quick. You know, Marini's at points then taken over as a leader. Now Mir's gotten these results. So I think that is proof that the bike overall is a competitive package and is getting better and better. And, you know, these are some kind of good races coming up for Honda. You know, if we think back to the past, you know, Indonesia, when we get to these harder tire carcasses, generally kind of doesn't work against Honda so much because it closes the field up. You know, Phillip Island will be a great circuit for that Honda, I think, with that traction, with that turning ability. You know, kind of Malaysia as well is kind of a little bit similar to what we to Motegi. You know, so there's a lot of great opportunities there, I think, for Honda, and just adds to that kind of intrigue going into next year when we have this final year of the regulations and, you know, Ducati stop development more or less. You know, they'll have to do a bit of development now, given how close everyone is. But, you know, Aprilia is kind of will be getting to its limits. KTM will have to be, you know, kind of making decisions as to what it does now and for 27. Honda and Yamaha are the only two manufacturers able to really keep piling the resources in if they want to. So I think, yeah, with Honda, you're looking into next year, if they can carry this forward, you know, who knows what's possible. Race wins, definitely. Podiums consistently, it's got to be the main aim. But now they've clearly got three riders that can do that for them, which a lot of manufacturers right now don't.
They can't. No, you're right. I think that's the real key point here, and I give a real credit to that test team. The fact they're going to Sepang, they're going to, obviously they could use Motegi. They kind of own it. They kind of own it. That sort of thing.
Nakagami tested.
Yeah.
Aleix tested it pretty recently as well. I think in Motegi and sort of Nakagami. So I guess that's probably helped a little bit. They've had a base setting, but still, that only gets you that gives you a good Friday. It doesn't necessarily give you a good weekend.
Spot on. I think. When I spoke to Mir at Silverstone, you can listen to the podcast. I'll link it below. I asked him, kind of, it's been 5 years sort of thing since the world title, and the thing he said to me, he says, I'm a winner. And I was like, people doubt this guy's a world champion. Like, how can you, when he says it to you, when someone says it to your face, they're a winner, you're like, of course you are. You've won lower classes, you're won on Suzuki and MotoGP, he's been in the top three in the championship. It's like, the guy will get it right. And I think everything that happened, and I don't think people realised, the fact that Suzuki pulled the plug when he was about to renew with them was a real dent to, like, just his MotoGP career. It broke his leg, and it's like, the guy will get there. And he came into Honda at a really hard time, and of course when Marc Marquez is your teammate, you're going in there, that's like going into the jungle, isn't it? You don't want to go in there and fight with him. But I think, as you said, that bike's rider friendly now, and you're seeing different riding styles adapt to different circuits, and they're all competitive. They're inside the top six. I think that's the best possible thing, because Honda, it's just, I love when they're up there. I don't, like I've said this before, I don't know if it's because growing up that they were just winning everything. It's just, it feels right, and I think that there's real optimism next year, because I think that package is really, really solid. And it kind of leaves that question. Maybe we'll talk about it in another podcast. What would Marc Marquez do on that thing? That's a big question I have in my head anyway. That we just see it over the weekend, you're thinking, he could potentially be winning on that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to end this on a bad note. Is he getting a penalty or anything for pushing a Marshall? Because we've seen Morbidelli get sort of 10-minute suspensions for ignoring stuff, and Fabio Quartararo getting 5 minutes for arguing. I haven't seen anything. Pete, have you clarified this with anybody?
So I think what Mark said was that what you saw on camera wasn't the whole story, and so what happened is that the marshals told Mark, we'll push you out, so that they kind of waved him away from the bike. He was pushing it, and then as they went to take over, it nearly fell over, and so that was why Mark was so frustrated, was because you've asked me not to do it myself, and then you've nearly dropped the bike, So then he came back and pushed it out himself. So I think there was a little bit more to it just before it happened, and that's why there wasn't anything more, because he did initially, okay, you guys take over, and then he had to step in, obviously, to stop the bike falling. So I think that's that was sort of what happened there. Yeah, no, you just reminded me there. It just ties in with what Lewis was saying about the delayed penalties. Of course, that came in because of Mark, wasn't it, in Portimao when he had the collision with Miguel Oliveira, and injured his hand, and said, "Okay, well, I'm not going to be at the next race, so that's the penalty gone." And then they tried to change the rule, didn't they? And the FIM tried to change the rule and got caught out on that. And so now, it says next race, and so that's why, no matter how long Martin or anyone else who has a penalty sits out, it's waiting for you when you come back, except for the circumstances that Lewis mentioned there. So yes, but that's why I think there was no issue there, because he sort of did what the marshal said at first, and then went, hang on a minute. And I think he pushed the marshal out the way quickly because he thought the bike was going to keep falling, so he was trying to get to it. And I think it was the side, he fell on the other side, so the last thing he wanted was to have the left-hand side damaged as well as the right-hand side. So anyway,
I think that just to conclude as well, I think it's really kind of been one of the great things about Simon Crafar coming in as lead steward, is he understands that kind of hot-headedness you might be under sometimes, and we have, as you mentioned, John, we have seen it penalised before, but also, Simon takes that time to speak to the riders, to kind of get those points of view, and then kind of form those judgments a little bit with kind of common sense, which I think has been lacking for a long time in the FIM stewards. Before this year, I think, obviously Hervé Poncharal, you kind of called it some chat GPT kind of style steward in a few rounds ago after not being too happy with the penalty. But fundamentally, I think what we got here is the quite a human approach to something that is just so fluid. There's a rule book, but how those rules are applied is a very fluid thing, because no two incidents are the exact same, and you need someone who kind of understands that. And therefore, when have we at any point this year talked about a bad penalty?
Yeah, very, very, very true.
Full credit again there to Simon Crafar.
Yeah, it's been a really good first season for him. I will say that the communication has been excellent in terms of, everyone knows where people stand now on the structure of penalties. I think is the key thing. So obviously you get a long lap, double long lap, and then it's pit lane start, back at group, whatever. You get that. There's a tier thing to it. And I think the way he's handled the lower classes has been a real example for the top class too. Because I think people in the past have been like, Moto3 are getting hammered here, but MotoGP riders are doing it. But now it's like, no, if they do it, everyone's getting a clip, essentially.
Yeah, well, you look at the David Munoz thing from Qatar, where they essentially said, look, if you do this again, or something similar, it'll be a pit lane start, and then if you do that again after that, it's a race ban. And they've applied that to Franco Morbidelli after various incidents where they've kind of gotten, in lieu of a penalty point system, which obviously they can't just invent that mid-season, that has to be an off-season rule change. They've gone, look, well, okay, the rule book says this, but you're a repeat offender, so we do have to raise the severity, and Munoz hasn't had a race ban or a pit lane start yet, and Franco Morbidelli has been as clean as a whistle since Barcelona. So it works if you apply things like that and maintain it through all the classes. It works, and again, hats off to Simon for that, because and the whole FIM Sturgeon team as well, because it definitely has made things a lot better.
If you enjoyed this podcast, like, comment on YouTube. Tell us what you thought of the weekend. Apple, Spotify, just give us a 5-star review. I believe you can comment now on Spotify too, so you can tell us what you thought. I can answer them. I think I can. I'll do that over the next few days anyway. And on YouTube, I forgot to say this. There's this thing on your mobile phone app now, so it's called Hype Points. I mean, it's all for the kids and streaming now, but it really helps. You can go down to your comments and swipe right. Give us your hype points, and then pushes the video up the algorithm. So yeah, I was reminding myself to plug that. We'll see you next week, and have a nice time and enjoy whatever you're doing. And yeah, we'll be back next Monday for a review of the Indonesian Grand Prix.